Overrun with illegal gang activities, residents of a public housing estate in London live in constant fear. Amongst them is pensioner Harry Brown, who generally avoids getting involved, but is eventually forced to put his former military tactics to use when he loses a close friend. After the successful recruitment of a new member in their gang, a couple of rowdy dealers roam around one of London's public housing estates while under the influence. Spotting a female on the way, they shoot in her direction to scare her. She ends up getting shot, however, which causes the guys to panic as they ride away carelessly fast. Unfortunately, they end up crashing into an oncoming trailer.
Single mother Karen Dobbs was shot yesterday in front of her 2-year-old son.
Harry Brown, an elderly pensioner, wakes up the next morning listening to news reports of this random and senseless act of violence. After having breakfast by himself, he does the dishes before preparing to leave for the hospital. Getting to a pedestrian subway on his way, he checks the time before deciding not to take the shortcut. At a pub a while later, Harry meets up with his friend named Len Atwell over a game of chess. Realizing that Harry is worried about Kath's deteriorating condition, Len assures his friend of a better time in the future. Just then, an exchange happens at the bar's counter, and Sid, the pub's owner, turns a blind eye towards it. Disgusted at the openness of the dealings, Len warns Harry that Sid must not be as upstanding a citizen as he thinks, since he must have been paid off. Back home later that evening, Harry witnesses an attempted car theft, which quickly turns violent once the owner turns up. Choosing to stay away from the mess, however, Harry shuts his blinds to ignore the incident and heads to bed. Soon woken up by a call from the hospital, he then rushes out in the rain. Despite the pedestrian subway being a shortcut, Harry again chooses not to take it, fearing coming across the local gangsters. When he finally gets to the hospital, however, it is already too late. Kath is then laid to rest alongside her and Harry's 13-year-old daughter, Rachel, who passed a few years ago. At the cemetery, Len joins Harry and consoles his friend. Over a game of chess as usual at Sid's pub a while later, Harry recounts how he had first met Kath during his time with the Marines. He adds, however, that he left that life behind when he decided to settle down with Kath. Initially curious about Harry's life in the Marines, Len eventually confesses to being bullied by a few local gang members. Already having suffered through a couple of incidents, Len says that he has had enough and reveals an old military bayonet hidden in his coat for his safety. Unwilling to let Len deal with the matter this way, Harry suggests asking the police for help instead. Stating that he has already tried that alternative with no luck, Len leaves the pub. Later that night, a pile of garbage burns at Len's doorstep as he unknowingly inhales the fumes during his nap. A severe coughing fit wakes him up as he takes in the smoke in his house. Stomping over the fire, he then steps outside for some fresh air while calling out to the troublemakers. The next morning, Detective Inspector Alice Frampton and Sergeant Terry Highcock visit Harry to inform him about Len's unfortunate passing. Giving him more details, Alice adds that Len was assaulted the night before and was found in a pedestrian walkway. Once the cops leave, Harry breaks down in devastation over the loss of his friend. Meanwhile, Alice and Terry arrest the gang leader, Noel Winters, under suspicion of homicide. Additionally, members of his gang, Carl, Dean, and Marky, are also arrested and questioned. Following the advice of their solicitor, however, all of them refuse to provide any comment. Despite Alice and Terry's repeated attempts to get any information from the suspects, they get no results and eventually end up having to release everyone due to lack of evidence. On the other hand, Harry attends Len's funeral by himself before heading to Sid's pub later that evening. Having had a few more drinks than usual, Harry is on his way home when he comes across Dean. Threatening Harry with a knife, Dean tries to rob him. However, Harry manages to stab Dean with the knife instead. Leaving Dean behind in his state, Harry rushes home and gets rid of his bloody clothes and scrubs his floor clean as well. The next morning, Alice pays Harry a visit yet again. Noticing one of the photographs in the house, Alice appreciates the medals that Harry was honored with during his time with the Marines. She then proceeds to inform Harry that they found a bayonet with Len's fingerprints at the scene. Confirming that Len never served in the forces, Alice asks whether the bayonet belonged to Harry instead. Denying his involvement, Harry states that it could have belonged to Len's father. He does add, however, that Len showed him the bayonet the last time they met, and clarifies that it was only for protection from the harassment he was facing. Alice then states that since Len's weapon was used for his end, it could be argued that it was done in self-defense, and hence the charges could be reduced to those of manslaughter. Angry about the situation, Harry simply asks Alice to leave. Going through a box of mementos later, Harry finds his own knife before stepping out of the house. Going over to Len's house in a different part of the same estate, Harry finds that it has been heavily graffitied by the gang. From one of the windows, he sees the entrance of the pedestrian subway and spots a few members of the gang. Soon witnessing an altercation, Harry watches as a couple is scared away by the gang before deciding his plan of action. Later that evening, Harry follows a dealer named Kenny to his hideout. Meeting another associate there named Stretch, Harry then asks to buy a weapon to shoot the pigeons from his roof. Upon being invited further into the hideout, Harry realizes that Kenny and Stretch are involved with not only growing cannabis, but that they are also abusing an overdosed girl. While Harry gets shown a few options of guns, he continues to worry about the unconscious girl. Stretch then threatens Harry and asks him to focus on what he came to get instead. Finding an opportunity to make his move, Harry suddenly distracts Kenny and stabs his hand. Stretch immediately aims his gun at Harry, but it ends up being out of ammunition. Shooting Kenny then, Harry takes multiple shots at Stretch as he attempts to escape. Following Stretch out, Harry finds him with a gut wound and recounts how a similar injury had led to the end of one of his former colleagues. Taking a final shot then, Harry prepares to leave the hideout with the girl and a bag of weapons. Before he leaves, however, he sets the place on fire. Driving to the hospital, Harry finds a wad of cash in the bag from the hideout. Leaving some with the girl, he honks once to gain the attention of the hospital staff before running away into the night with the rest of the cash and the bag of weapons. At work, meanwhile, Alice meets her boss, Superintendent Childs, as he informs her about the launch of an operation headed by himself to curb the rising gang violence around the estate. Stating that he expects her and Terry to attend the briefing for the same, he also mentions that Len's case will have to be pushed down her priority list. At the local church, Harry donates the rest of the cash even as Alice and Terry arrive at the hospital, where the girl from the hideout is being treated. Later that evening, Harry spies the pedestrian subway from Len's window once again. He continues watching as another dealer walks up to Noel and threatens him by saying that his uncle only has a week to pay up. The dealer then shouts for Marky to join him as he leaves the estate. Parking in an isolated location, he then abuses Marky before paying him and asking him to leave. A sudden gunshot just then ends his life, causing Marky to panic. Having pulled the trigger, Harry gets closer and nabs Marky. Torturing Marky then leads to Harry being informed that it was Len who came at the gang with his bayonet that night, and that they only slapped him a couple of times. In order to get Harry to stop torturing him, Marky admits to having footage of the entire incident on his phone. Watching the video himself, Harry realizes that his friend indeed instigated the gang, who then retaliated with the worst. Apologizing to Harry then, Marky states that they only meant to scare Len, and reiterates that he wasn't involved with the stabbing.
So ain't no mundo about me, no?
Once Marky names Noel and Carl as Len's culprits, Harry goes over to the pedestrian subway. Noel and Carl are then forced into a gunfight, even as Harry uses Marky as bait while remaining in the shadows himself. Carl and Marky soon lose their lives, and Noel flees the subway. While Harry attempts to follow Noel, he suffers an emphysema attack, leading to him ditching his weapon in the canal before losing consciousness. Waking up in the hospital a while later, Harry sees Terry and Alice by his side. Saying that he didn't see anyone at the canal, Harry is then taken away by the nurses before any more questions could be asked. Before handing over Harry's coat, however, Alice gets a whiff off it and asks Terry where Harry was found. Heading over to the canal then, she wonders if Harry was searched before being taken to the hospital. When Terry seems confused, she mentions smelling cordite, an explosive used in ammunition, on Harry's coat. Terry, however, is more interested in getting to Superintendent Child's briefing instead. Arriving there, they find that the briefing is done and that the team is headed out along with the superintendent to execute 13 warrants at the estate. Attempting to put forward her findings, Alice states that Harry Brown is not a witness, but possibly their chief suspect. Explaining further, she mentions him being friends with Len, whose case is related to the same pedestrian subway as the one where the shootings of Carl and Marky took place the night before. Refusing to believe that a vigilante pensioner could be their suspect, Superintendent Childs dismisses Alice's request for a warrant to test Harry's clothes for gunfire residue. Continuing on his way out to the estate, he then informs her that he has recommended her to be transferred to another case of identity theft. Asking her to take the weekend before her new assignment, Superintendent Childs takes his leave. Arriving at the estate with the entire team, Superintendent Childs orders a major police operation, which quickly escalates into a riot-like situation. Even as the superintendent gets himself out of the estate, his vehicle is attacked, while the gang members and dealers slowly begin retaliating. At the hospital, meanwhile, Harry pulls out his IV and walks out of the hospital, intending to find Noel. Back at the estate, a riot is in full force, with the police being forced to take retreating steps. Hearing about Harry having discharged himself, meanwhile, Alice speaks to Terry about her suspicions. When she says that Harry might be headed to the estate to end Noel's life, a nonchalant Terry initially replies that it might be a favor done for the police if it were to be true. Despite his anger at Alice for missing the superintendent's briefing, Terry then agrees to help her locate Harry, carefully finding his way through the violent estate. On the other hand, Harry hurries to where he stashed the weapons he sourced from Kenny and Stretch. Meanwhile, Alice and Terry arrive at the estate, where their vehicle is attacked before crashing into another car. While Terry is severely injured, Alice notices Harry come over to their rescue. Together with Alice, Harry carries Terry to Sid's pub for safety, before asking Sid to call for an ambulance. When a thoroughly disturbed Alice notices that Harry is armed, she asks him when the cycle of revenge will end. Clarifying, she then informs Harry that Sid is Noel's uncle. Realizing his error, Harry goes looking for Sid in the pub's basement and asks about Noel. Admitting to having hidden his nephew, Sid then gets Noel to show himself and even forces him to lower his weapon. Having believed Noel when he swore that he had nothing to do with Len's passing, Sid is then told about the video on Marky's phone. Nonetheless, Sid refuses to let Harry end Noel's life because of their blood relation. Another oncoming emphysema attack allows Sid to disarm Harry before landing a punch, revealing himself to be the gang's real leader. Meanwhile, Alice attempts to call for backup, only to be interrupted by Noel attacking her. Dragging Harry back upstairs, Sid joins Noel and warns him about not leaving evidence of their deeds, and to instead only do as he's told in the future. Quickly formulating a plan, Sid then plans to end the lives of Harry, Alice, and Terry before throwing them out to make them look like victims of the riot. Seeing Terry's condition, Sid begins with him and suffocates him till he breathes his last, while an injured Alice helplessly looks on. Impressed with his uncle and hoping to replicate him, Noel turns to Alice and begins to strangle her. Even as she struggles to save herself, Harry quietly reaches for a weapon he hid in his socks and takes a shot at Noel. Sid immediately shoots at Harry in retaliation. As he readies to pull the trigger to mortally injure Harry, however, Sid is taken out by police snipers who have arrived at the estate in response to Alice's call for backup.
The ruling of the committee commend not only myself, but other members of the squad.
Following the riot at the estate, Superintendent Childs announces at a press conference that Terry is being awarded a medal posthumously, along with Alice for their efforts and bravery. However, he insists that investigations into the riot and the incidents before the riot have found no evidence to support the theory of the existence of a vigilante in the area. Elaborating, he also mentions that such baseless speculation might undermine police efforts before stating that the crime rate around the estate has now dropped by 30%. Meanwhile, Harry walks toward the now quiet and gang-free pedestrian subway of the estate,